from Twin Valley South in 2021 and from NBCTC. Some facts about me is that I love creating art. I went to CTC for graphic design. I love anything that involves just creating hands-on activities. I love my cats. I love sports. I ran track and I played soccer, and I love anything sweet. I love candy. So I'm here to talk about my 9-month mission trip that I just recently got back from, I think 2 weeks ago at this point. I was gone for 9 months on a program called the World Race. The World Race has 2 long-term mission trips. One of them is 11 months long and one of them is 9 months long. The 11-month one is for ages 21 through 35, and the one that I went on is for people just out of high school, so it's like 18 to 21-year-olds. The World Race is a program that is an opportunity to help serve others. We partner with leaders when we go overseas, and we just bring hope to the communities. We just really bring the hope of Jesus. And we're not there to change anything. We're just there to partner alongside what's already happening. It helps people grow in their identity and faith. And it's also a great way to just dive into a Christian community. And I'll explain how squads and teams work, and you'll understand the community aspect. So I found out about the World Race a few years ago. I remember I was new to a church. It was a community of faith. And I was sitting there. I'd only been going for a couple months, and this lady got back. And the pastor had introduced her like a welcome back. And he was like, "Oh, welcome back so-and-so from your 11-month mission trip." And I thought to myself, oh my gosh, 11 months, like you were gone for that long. He mentioned that it was the World Race, and that was the first time that I ever heard about it. And I thought it sounded insane, and I never wanted to do it. I just didn't think I could be away from her for that long, but I was like, good for her, that's so awesome. So that's how I first ended up hearing about it. And then later on, I had a friend whose sibling had done the World Race, and then come to find out there was actually more people than I thought in our tiny town that had done this program. And so it was appealing at that point. I was like, why are so many people going on this trip? What is so good about it? This was interesting. I always knew I didn't want to go to college after high school. I didn't know what I wanted to do, so why go and spend the money if you don't know what you want to do? And so I decided to take a gap year, and at that point I was growing more in my faith. I was learning more about Jesus, and I thought that going on the World Race, thinking back to all those memories of when people were being introduced or when people told me about the race, that started to come up towards the end of my senior year, or towards the end of my junior year, when I was thinking more about my future. And so I decided that it was the perfect opportunity to just, 1, travel the world, 2, just create friendships that will last a lifetime, and 3, just learn more about the Lord and grow in my faith. So, I left in the September of 2021, and we went to Gainesville, Georgia, and we were in Gainesville, Georgia for 8 weeks. I'll explain how squads and teams work. So basically, you pick a route. There are 3 different routes, and the routes just determine like what countries you're going to and the ministries that you're working with. When you apply and then you get accepted, you have about 25 to 45 people per route. So on my route, it was pretty big. We had 40 people, and so that's on the bigger end. Some of them only had 20, and that's pretty small. So the 40 of us, we first had a boot camp, and that was in the summer of 2021. And so we all went down to Georgia for 4 days, I think, and we had a little like preparation. They made us cultural food based off of where we were going, and all of us were just appalled by it. We thought it was so weird. And so we got a little taste of what it would be like to be overseas. First, we got to meet all of each other for the first time, and it was so sweet because at that point we'd only been texting, and you don't really get a feel for what someone's like over text. So it was a really sweet 4 days, and that was last June. And that's when we all came together, and after that, I didn't really think about the World Race. I think I just thought that was it, and I was like, oh, that was so cool. I met everyone that I'm going to be with, and I'm not actually leaving for 9 months. I'm just going to go move on with life. And so then I kind of just put it to the back of my mind. I didn't even think about the World Race. I didn't think about leaving. I didn't really want to think about leaving. And then the day came on September 11th, and I had to leave. And it didn't really hit me at that point either until I packed all of my things into just like 2 backpacks. One of them weighed like 50 pounds, and then I left to go to Gainesville. So I went to Gainesville, Georgia, and we all met up again. And so this time there were all 3 squads. So there's about like 150 of us on the base in Gainesville, Georgia. And we, for 8 weeks, had a lot of teachings. We learned what it was like to not go overseas and necessarily change people's ways, but to learn from them and to also teach them things. So it wasn't like us going overseas and being like, this is wrong, you need to fix this, why are you doing things this way? But they were like, no, you're actually going overseas to learn from them and to learn from their ways and to just have an open mind and to just like understand why they do the things they do. And so that was really cool. We had a lot of alumni come in and just teach to us, and we got to have a lot of wisdom from them. We had people that were long-term missionaries overseas. We had video calls with them. So the 8 weeks in Georgia was just a super vital part of the entire trip because it really prepared us to go overseas instead of just them throwing us into like Costa Rica and being like, here, go do mission work. So that was really cool. And then for 2 weeks out of the 8 weeks, we went to New Orleans and we helped with Samaritan's Purse. And that was so fun. I love manual labor, surprisingly. I learned how to hammer nails and I love roofing, and it was so fun. And that was a super fun time. We got to meet a lot of cool homeowners and these people. We just got to bring a lot of hope to them. A lot of them had had damage from hurricanes. And so they were just sitting there waiting in their damaged houses, and a lot of them just thought there was no hope. They didn't think that anyone was going to come and help them or help their houses, and some of them didn't have the money to like do anything themselves. And so it was a really cool opportunity for us to just go there and talk to the homeowners, and then we got to pray for them, and we just got to know more of their hearts. And so that was a super cool experience for 2 weeks. When we got back, we had about 2 days left in Gainesville, and then we headed overseas. The 3 countries that I went to was Costa Rica, Guatemala, and Eswatini. Eswatini is just a really tiny country in the southern part of Africa. It was known as Swaziland. So we left to go overseas, and I was so excited because this was my first time leaving the country, and I also love plane rides, and so it was just a blast. The first place I went was Costa Rica, and we were in Costa Rica from roughly November 2nd to January 14th. So we were there for a couple months. I went to 3 different places in Costa Rica. The first place I went to was Jaco. Jaco is like a touristy kind of beach town in Costa Rica, and we stayed in a 2-story house. So 40 people in a 2-story house. There were definitely weird smells, and it was very crowded at points, but it was still fun because there was a lot of bonding. You kind of had to bond when you have that many people in a small house. We did a thing called light post ministry. So around the town of Jaco, what they would do is they would paint these like concrete light posts, and they would paint them with tropical animals. And it was like a scavenger hunt for people that came to the town. So you would paint animals that you would see around Jaco, and then you would put little like black hearts in their eyes, and it was supposed to be like a little scavenger hunt. You walk around town and you find them. So our job was to paint the post and to draw the animals, and then we painted them. And it was a really cool ministry opportunity. I think at first, a lot of us were like, why are we painting light posts? Like, is this what we signed up for? But in the long run, it was so fun because everyone is curious as to why there are 40 people painting light posts. So people would come up to us and they would say, what are you doing? And we would get to tell them, and we'd say, hey, like, we're on a 9-month mission trip, and this is what we're doing, and we're here painting light posts. And it was just a great opportunity. We got to pray for a lot of people. Got to talk to a lot of cool people. And since it was so touristy, it wasn't just like Costa Ricans, it was people from all over. So the second place that I went to in Costa Rica was Nicoya. And this was for 2 weeks, and it was a team place. So we have our squad of 40 people, and then within the 40 people you have teams. So it was me and 4 other girls, and then there was like 5 other girl teams and then 2 guy teams. And your team is like your core people. You have team times at the end of every day for a couple hours, and so they're the people that you really open up with, you're very vulnerable with. They're just like your core people. And so for those 2 weeks, every team went to a different place in Costa Rica, and my team was partnered with another team, and we were in this tiny remote place called Nicoya. And I loved it a lot, even though it was super remote and there was no service whatsoever. It was just a really cool place to just unwind, and there were mountains, and we would take walks on the road. They had a little soccer field. It was a really beautiful place. We slept on the floor of a church. It was a 1-room church, and then in the back was just a very tiny house, and that's where our host, his name was Basilio, he was also the pastor of the church. That's where him and his family lived. I loved it here, not just because of the scenery, but also because of our host, Basilio. So I'll talk about him for a second. He was the kindest man ever, and did not speak any English, and none of us spoke Spanish. So I think this was like the perfect example of like love doesn't need like a language. Like you don't have to like talk to each other to like show love. He was just the most compassionate person ever. And it was so fun helping him make breakfast in the mornings because I had no idea what he was telling me to do and he had no idea what I was saying. And so it was just like this back and forth of not understanding, but I could still see his heart and his compassion and his love for us and how he just was so hospitable and took care of us so well. And so we were really close with him, the 10 of us, and we loved him a lot. And so he was just a really kind guy, and I'll remember him for a long time. In Nicoya, our ministry was a lot of burning trash. We burned trash, and we raked leaves, and we burned the leaves. And so we did a lot of just like manual labor, housework. We just kept the place tidy. We did a few house visits, and for those of you who don't know what a house visit is, it's basically where you go to a person's house and you just sit there and you ask them questions about their life, and they will open up to you a bit and they'll tell you about their life, and then you ask if they can pray for anything, and then you pray for them, and then you just keep in contact with them and you check in on them and see how they're doing. Because a lot of people, I came to realize during a house visit, they really just want someone to talk to. So it's actually super helpful to go there and just sit and just be someone that listens and then offers them prayer at the end, because a lot of people appreciate that. So we did a little bit of that in Nicoya, but for the main part, it was a lot of housework and just tidying up and keeping things clean. The third place that I went to in Costa Rica was Puerto Viejo. This was another touristy beach town, but the beach town was about a mile away. We actually stayed in the middle of a jungle. It was deep in the jungle, and we stayed in like I can't really describe it, but it was like a 2-story cabin, like a big log cabin type of building. There was like a balcony, like an awning that went all the way around the 2nd story. So we slept in bunk beds. Some of us chose to tent on the awning because the bunk beds were kind of gross. So I was one of those people. I slept in my tent. It was a super cool experience being in the jungle. They had these things called howler monkeys. So every morning at 4 a.m., these like monkeys sounded like demons, and they would just wake me up by screeching. And I didn't know what they were for a long time, so I thought I was just having bad dreams every morning. But then I was informed that they were monkeys. But I always thought monkeys went like, wow. So to hear that, I was terrified. But in Puerto Viejo, we did all manual labor. If I had to describe Costa Rica in one word, it would probably be manual labor. We chopped the jungle with machetes. We would move these huge logs. Our job was to just like squat down and try to roll them over as far as we could. We painted houses. We just did a lot of manual labor, which was fun. It was really hot, really humid, but it was a good time and it grew our muscles. So the next place that we went to was Guatemala. So in January, we packed up and we left and we flew to Guatemala. And originally, my route was supposed to be Thailand instead. And then at Samaritan's Purse, we got the news that we're not going to Thailand, we're actually going to Colombia. So we were all super excited to go to Colombia. And then in Nicoya, they said, never mind, you're not going to Colombia either, you're going to Guatemala. And so there were so many changes happening. And I remember at first being super bummed. I thought of Guatemala as this place that every missionary goes to. It was still in Central America, and selfishly, I think I just wanted to really go to like another continent. But Guatemala ended up being my favorite place, so it was a blessing in disguise. We were in Guatemala from January 14th to March 21st. We stayed at an Adventures and Missions base, and Adventures and Missions is like the program that runs the World Race. So they're like the top program, and then the World Race is like their little program. So we stayed at a main base, and I can't describe the base. It was like an L shape. There was a big common area. That's where we ate meals. That's where we played games. There were couches and a kitchen. And then on this side of the L-shaped building, it was like 8 rooms, and we stayed with our teams. So each room had like 4 bunk beds, and you would just sleep in there with your team. And it was a super good time to bond with our team. Our ministry in Guatemala looked a lot different than Costa Rica. It wasn't just one consistent ministry. We actually had a few tied in the weekdays. And so I found that I really liked that. It was much better than just a constant ministry that we were doing. I liked the variety of it. And so on Mondays and Fridays, we went to a ministry called Hope for Kids. Our bus driver who took us to ministry, his name was Manuel, and he had a girlfriend named Myra. And Myra opened up a ministry, and it was a building probably the size of like a garage. And the goal of the ministry was, it was in like a neighborhood that was filled with poverty. So the hope of the ministry was that these kids would come into this place, they would have a place where they had coloring books and balls to play with, and we would play with the kids. And she went to culinary school, so she was a really good cook, and she would make them nutritious meals, and she would make them one meal a day, and they would get to eat, and then they would bring little Tupperware, and they would take it home. And it was really sweet, because a lot of the kids, they didn't get fed well at home. And so that became me and my team's favorite ministry. We really fell in love with those children. A lot of them just wanted love and affection. So even if they were just sitting in our lap, they absolutely just loved it. They would just sit there contently for hours and just accept the love that we were giving them. So we grew a really close bond with those kids and with Myra. Sadly, the ministry stopped about a month into our time in Guatemala. It was a 5-day-a-week ministry before we got there, and then when we got there, it was only Mondays and Fridays, and then after that, the sponsors had stopped sponsoring, and so she had to pay for college, for culinary school, and so there wasn't any money coming in. And so sadly, the ministry had to stop, but we're hoping that the ministry will continue again someday. On Tuesdays, we went to a place called Hope Ministry. Hope Ministry was a place, they called it the garden. It was like a big shelter, and then there were beautiful trees and beautiful flowers all around and like a big open grass space. In the mornings, we would do the house visits that I was talking about. We would just go to these people's houses, mainly mothers. We would go to their houses, we would bring them food and toilet paper and dish soap and things that just weren't as easily accessible, especially for this neighborhood that was like a poverty-filled neighborhood. So we would go there and we would just talk to these women and we just heard their hearts, and then we would pray for them, and we did that every Tuesday morning. And then in the afternoon, we went back to the garden, and these kids would come, probably about 30 or 40 kids, and we would do a vacation Bible school with them. So we would play with them, and then they would have a little teaching, and then after that, we would do a craft with them. And it was super lovely. I loved all the children. On Wednesdays, we went back to the garden area, and we did a program called Beauty for Ashes. Beauty for Ashes was a program that allowed women from the same community, they would all come together, and they would just uplift each other, and they would encourage each other, and we had a craft for them. It would always be something super sweet for Valentine's Day. We decorated cookies. They also planted cactuses. So just super fun things. They had icebreaker games to get to know one another deeply. And so it was just really cool to watch and to experience these women just getting super close to one another because they definitely needed it. On Thursdays, we had activation. So every Thursday was called Activation Thursday, and so our whole squad would stay at the base, and in the morning, the staff would give us teachings and lessons. And they all varied. Sometimes it was hearing the voice of God, sometimes it was about joy, just all these different messages. And so we would take notes, we would listen to the messages all morning. There would be multiple people that would speak, and then in the afternoon, we would be sent out into the different neighboring towns, and we would put to practice what we just learned. So if we learned how to hear the voice of God, we would go out to these communities, we would stop, we would pray, we would see if God put anything on our hearts, and then we would just follow the Spirit. And so wherever the Lord led us, we would just go, and we had a lot of cool experiences doing that. Fridays. So Mondays and Fridays were the Hope for Kids. So that was it for our ministry in Guatemala. Time went by way too fast. I was so sad to leave Guatemala. I built so many cool connections with the staff, with the children, with the ministry hosts, with the people in the communities, and it was just a super beautiful place, and I can't wait to maybe go back someday. So we left there, and from March 21st to May 19th, we were in Africa. So we had a 14-hour plane ride to Africa, and we got there all super jet lagged, but ready to go. And our ministry in Africa was going to care points and working with children. For that, I'll describe our living conditions. Some people chose to camp. There was like a big building, and they had big rooms full of like 12 bunk beds for us to sleep in. But if you really wanted to camp, you could. So a lot of people chose the camping route. I tried the camping route, but my tent flooded, so then I moved to a bunk bed. But teach their own. So in Africa, our ministry was to go to care points. So some people's care point was an hour away, some people's care point was 10 minutes away. But what a care point is, it was just a AIM-affiliated building, a very small building, probably the size of a garage, or like a one-room church building. And these kids from the neighborhood would go there every single day, whether they had school or not. They would go after school if they had school, but if it was summer, there were so many kids that would show up. And the same type of deal in Guatemala, they would have a meal cooked for them. It was like a huge kettle, and they would put in this like rice type meal. I forget the name of it, but basically we would just feed the children. They would bring their little Tupperware. For a lot of the kids, it was the only meal they got per day. So we made a lot, and then they would eat, and then they would wash out their little tubs, and then they would fill them up again, and they would take them home. It was super cool getting to know these kids. The age range was like anywhere from babies to like 16-year-olds. So it was super cool to get to just talk to the people that were like in their teenage years, and a lot of them spoke English. Their first language is Swahili, but a lot of them are taught English as a second language. So it was cool to just get to connect to like the 16-year-olds, and they were so curious about our culture, and I'm so curious about their culture. So it was like we were learning from each other, and it was super awesome. And obviously holding the babies was so fun. That was more up my alley. And then I also worked at a clinic. Not everyone got to work at a clinic. It was only 2 people chosen from my squad. So me and this other guy, every Tuesday and Thursday, we went to a local clinic and we would help out. It was a very slow clinic. We didn't really do a whole lot. We filed a lot of paperwork. But if anything, it was a great opportunity to just get to know the people that worked there. There were a lot of older women in the community that worked there, and it was super fun getting to know their heart. And they asked so many questions about America, and then I got to ask so many questions and how to say things in Siswati, but I never learned any of it. It's a hard language. So yeah, those were the countries I went to. After that, May 19th, we flew back to Georgia, Gainesville, Georgia. We had our final debrief, so it was a week of just celebration. It was very bittersweet because we knew we were leaving one another, but also it was a time to just celebrate what the past 9 months had been, what our favorite part was, what we thought was hard, what we managed to get through. So it was a super cool time to just look back and honestly just celebrate and cry tears of joy. And it was a time that I'll forever cherish, for sure. I made a lot of amazing friends. It was a huge fear of mine I'm an introvert, so it was a huge fear to go and live with 40 people, but never did I think the day I woke up at home I would miss being around 40 people. So yeah, that was my trip. My favorite part, I have it written down, and it's so hard when people ask because how do you pick a favorite part out of 9 months? But I would say my favorite part in general was just getting to experience the different cultures. I love getting to meet all the new people. We learned new traditions, we ate the food, we learned the language. There were so many memories of us playing with the locals. We played volleyball with them or soccer with them. And so I think just those memories and also just all the scenery, everything was beautiful. Africa had the most beautiful sunsets. In Guatemala, we hiked a volcano, and that was beautiful. And so my favorite part was definitely just experiencing more of the world. I loved it. What I learned. This is also a hard question because I learned so much, but I decided to just say that for now, what I learned is that the Lord works everything in according to His plan. And a good example of this is Guatemala, because I was not excited and it ended up being my favorite place. There were a lot of ups and downs being overseas, but I can look back and point out so many times where I thought something was going terrible, but the Lord actually worked it out for such a good purpose and for so much goodness. And instead of looking back and thinking, oh, that was a bad moment, I look back and I think, wow, that was such like a glory-filled moment, and that actually worked out so well. And so I'd like to end with a verse, and the verse is just Romans 8:28, and it says, and we know that for those who love God, all things work together for good, for those who are called according to His purpose.